Hello, your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley, here again back for another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast, this time with the Life of Kurt Schaffenberger, the quintessential artist of Lois Lane. Not all comic book creators make contributions to the medium in traditional ways. While some made new characters and others new stories, Kurt Schaffenberger is famous for bringing the romance and humor to Superman, humanizing his girlfriend, Lois Lane. Before that, Lois Lane was just a trivial side character, and while her constant attempts to get Superman to marry her are dated today, it was a huge step forward for her, eventually to making her the dynamic character we know and love today. It wasn't just Lois Lane, though, as Kurt Schaffenberger was a stalwart artist since the Golden Age, making contributions to Captain Marvel and numerous other works throughout the medium, along with making his own mark in comic book history. Kurt Schaffenberger was born in Zella-Mehlis, Germany on December 15, 1920. His parents were Ernest and Emma Wall, and he was their only child, growing up on the farm in the Thuringen Forest, where he said he teased geese, herded goats, and hoed potatoes. When the young Schaffenberger was 7, his family immigrated to the United States in 1927 to 1928, landing in Hartford, Connecticut. In America, Ernest worked as a toolmaker at the Royal Typewriting Company for 25 years, and Kurt kept his father's retirement gift, an engraved typewriter, after he passed. Growing up in America, Kurt Schaffenberger loved movies and comic strips and had dreams of becoming an artist, even if his father discouraged it, as he wanted his job to work in the machine shop as well, probably seeing it as a more stable job. Like many of the children of that age, Schaffenberger admired the work of Milton Caniff, Hal Foster, and Alex Raymond, and tried to copy their art from the funny pages every week. He was able to use his drawing ability to connect with his fellow neighborhood kids, as Schaffenberger was still learning English at the time. When Kurt Schaffenberger was 12 in 1933, Funnies on the Parade, considered the first comic book in America, was published, soon followed by Famous Funnies, and later New Fun Comics, by his future employer, National DC Comics. Of course, these will be followed by Action Comics #1 in June of 1938, featuring the debut of Superman and Lois Lane, characters that would play a huge part in Schaffenberger's future career and the launch of the golden age of American comic books. However, by this point, Schaffenberger was more interested in being a magazine illustrator like Norman Rockwell, as many comic book artists originally wished to be, and much of the comic book scene passed him by at the time. In 1938, in fact, Schaffenberger graduated from William Hall High School as salutatorian, though his father would criticize him for not being valedictorian. This did lead him to get a scholarship at the Pratt Institute, where he studied oil painting, figure drawing, and history, eventually graduating at the age of 20. During this time, another pivotal comic book character, Captain Marvel, today known as Shazam, made his debut in Whiz Comics #2 in February of 1940, but this would be another pivotal character in Schaffenberger's career that he would first miss. On June of 1941, he joined Jack Binder's art studio, an art packager that sold features to be published in various comic books, in Englewood, New Jersey, which was a barn, with no air conditioning, thus you were either sweltering during the summer, having to wrap towels around their forearms so the sweat wouldn't drip into finished art, or freezing during the winter, to the point that the ink in their bottles would be frozen at times. Schaffenberger started out doing mostly piecework, with up to 6 artists working on one page, and formed a good working relationship with his colleagues. Schaffenberger described he did the main figures, while others did the layouts and the background figures. Schaffenberger started out making $55 a week, a fortune for him at the time, and within a year he was making $100 a week. Soon he was working on Captain Marvel, Doc Savage, and Mandrake the Magician. However, the barn was stressful as it had no AC, so Schaffenberger and his fellow artists would play baseball during the lunch break, even arranging matches with rival art studios. Schaffenberger's personal life would also improve as well, as he met a girl that would not only be a future model for him, but his wife as well, Dorothy. They met in 1941 when Kurt Schaffenberger was looking for an apartment close to the Binder's studio, as the commute from Brooklyn to Englewood was getting too punishing. As luck would have it, a football coach was leaving to go to work at Fordham University, who turned out to be future legend Vince Lombardi, and Schaffenberger was able to rent it out. Mrs. Bogart, who rented the room to Schaffenberger, happened to be the best friend to the mother of one Dorothy Dot Bates Watson, and even arranged a get-together where the young couple first met. While sparks didn't fly at first, they were soon in each other's social scenes, especially when Schaffenberger joined a local band where he played the accordion. By Christmas of 1941, Schaffenberger even had Dorothy help him get a cameo as a present for his mother, but when she showed up at the apartment, he found him dressed in a tuxedo, ready to take another girl out. Schaffenberger would joke years later that the reason Dorothy married him was to get back at him over this. Despite these ups and downs, Kurt and Dorothy were getting closer, but then World War II began. Kurt Schaffenberger's and Dorothy's relationship was interrupted when he was drafted in the Army in June of 1942. After training, Schaffenberger was stationed in Liverpool as part of the 1st Special Services Unit, where his artistic skills were put to use, doing everything from painting instructional posters to lettering garbage cans. He was stationed there for 3 years, eventually achieving the rank of Master Sergeant. With his German background and language skills, he was offered a dangerous assignment of being dropped behind enemy lines, even with $10,000 in diamonds as an incentive to do so by the Office of the Strategic Services, OSS, the precursor of the CIA. Schaffenberger turned it down as it was strictly volunteer and required him to go without his uniform. He told the OSS brass, "You can send me anywhere you want to in my uniform, but I'm not going anywhere without it." Plus, he was upset over being passed over for officer school. However, Schaffenberger did work for the OSS as a translator while crafting personalized cards to Dot every day, a tradition he would carry on for the rest of his life. Since this was wartime, all mail from soldiers was at first reviewed by the censor office to ensure no sensitive information was released. When Schaffenberger made a jab at the censor and one of them on a Valentine's Day card to Dot, she noted the censor responded by placing a stamp over it. On September 15th, 1945, Schaffenberger was discharged despite a permanent offer from the OSS, which he was not interested in. Thus, Schaffenberger could have been on the ground floor of the CIA when it was formed. He promptly went back to work as a comic book artist for Beck Costanza Studio, which was founded by Captain Marvel artists C.C. Beck and Pete Costanza, before going to Fawcett Publishing, where he worked on Ibis the Invincible, his first solo gig, which ran from 1946 to 1948. On March 30th, 1946, Kurt and Dorothy were married while he continued to work at Fawcett, doing lead features and covers for Wiz Comics, Master, Captain Marvel Jr., and the Marvel Family. Soon, Schaffenberger's own style started to emerge after imitating C.C. Beck, Captain Marvel's co-creator, for so long, and he started to pencil and ink a page a day, usually dividing it up by penciling 2 pages a day and then inking them the next day. His storytelling and attention to detail, anatomy, thick and thin inking, and humor all becoming more apparent with his style. Schaffenberger even did a Yogi Berra baseball hero comic in 1951. Kurt and Dorothy Schaffenberger had 2 children, Susan, born on September 19, 1947, followed by Carl on February 1, 1950, living in their starter home in River's Edge, northwest of Englewood, New Jersey, for 42 years. Dot originally quit working, but would rejoin the workforce, at least intended to be temporarily, when Schaffenberger's work went through a slow period. It was at Rexel Chemical, and like their starter home, this temp job lasted for 25 years. Schaffenberger also continued to design his own Christmas cards and holiday cards, depicting his family throughout the years. Unfortunately, when Fawcett Publishing folded due to DC's lawsuits of Captain Marvel, claiming it to be a carbon copy of Superman. Anyone who's ever read Captain Marvel would laugh at such a notion, since the characters were startlingly different down to their personalities. Captain Marvel was more fun-loving, while Superman serious. However, Jack Leibowitz of National DC made a point to sue any competitor who attempted to copy off the success of Superman. Some lawsuits did have merit, such as Wonder Man by Will Eisner and Bob Iger for Fox Feature Syndicate, which was proven to be a genuine ripoff of Action Comics #1 in itself in the courts. Besides a passing resemblance in appearance, Captain Marvel and Superman were quite distinct, though. In fact, Captain Marvel flew before Superman did, as the latter was still leaping tall buildings in a single bound, before he gained the ability to fly. Due to the fallout of the lawsuit, Fawcett and the downturn of comic books in general, from the Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency and the creation of the CCA, Schaffenberger lost a large chunk of his income and would scramble to find work until 1954. His last work for Fawcett would be a Marvel Family team-up story. During this time, he worked at Atlas, the former Timely Comics and Future Marvel, inking Captain America stories and adventures into mystery and astonishing, but reportedly Stan Lee didn't like his style. Schaffenberger also worked for Gleason, Premiere, and EC Comics, and finally did Classics Illustrated number 190 of May of 1954 for Gilberton Publications as a last resort, as they paid the worst of the outfits at the time. There he did an adaptation of Soldiers of Fortune. Schaffenberger tried to make a baseball strip for the newspapers, but it never panned out. Next, Schaffenberger went to American Comics Group, ACG, in 1955, drawing covers for Forbidden Worlds and Adventures in the Unknown, where he was allowed to sign his own name on his work. When Schaffenberger eventually went back to DC, they objected to this, so he signed his name Lew Wall, the name of his maternal grandfather, though his fans weren't fooled. Kurt continued to work at ACG until it folded in 1967. Other work Schaffenberger found was at Custom Comics, which did giveaway books for corporations and governments, such as the U.S. Air Force, Chrysler, and Montgomery Ward, while also working in advertising that would soon return to mainstream comics in his biggest contribution to comic books yet. When DC decided to do a Lois Lane comic book series under Mort Weisinger, who edited all of Superman's books at the time, Otto Binder suggested Kurt Schaffenberger for the job. After a tryout and showcase, Lois Lane got her own comic book, Superman's Girlfriend, Lois Lane, debuting on March-April of 1958, with the story focus being Lois constantly trying to get Superman to marry her, only to be fouled in the end in some comedic way. Schaffenberger drew most of the first 81 issues, missing only issue number 29, and he even redid her hair in the first story, The Bombshell of the Blonde in Lois Lane number 1, hoping to update the Wayne Boring's unfeminine look he originally gave the character. The comic would last for 10 years until September-October of 1967, running for 137 issues plus 2 annuals. Meant to be a lighthearted and romantic series, it would often feature rival Lana Lang, Clark Kent and Superman's girlfriend, for Superman's affections. The jealousy was to the point that Kurt actually drew Lois Lane as the villain whenever Lana Lang appeared. While Schaffenberger enjoyed the series, he hated working for Superman editor Mort Weisinger, whom he called a sadist that drove Otto Binder out of the comic book business. Despite that, Weisinger reportedly liked Schaffenberger's art, calling him his favorite Lois Lane artist, and was so good Schaffenberger was able to sign his own name at DC, while many other of his fellow artists couldn't in the 1960s. The editors enjoyed Schaffenberger's style so much that they would have him actually alter Lois Lane and Lana Lang's heads in the other Superman books. For fun, Schaffenberger also inserted Captain Marvel in Lois Lane number 42 in 1963 in the story The Monkey's Paw. It was also in Lois Lane number 70 in November of 1966 that Catwoman made her Silver Age debut, engaging in a, of course, catfight with Lois Lane, which Schaffenberger penciled. Kurt Schaffenberger would try out several different hairstyles for Lois Lane at the reader's request, with the hopes to keep up with changing fashions. The character had a 50s hairstyle well into the 1960s. With up to 6 appearing in Lois Lane Annual number 1 in summer of 1962, ranging from a bouffant to a ruffle cut to a pinwheel bang. However, after a reader vote, it was decided to keep her hairstyle the same, which Mort Weisinger agreed to, as changing it would make the reprints more difficult. At the reader's request, Kurt Schaffenberger even had Superman give Lois a spanking at one point. A fan letter in Lois Lane number 21 felt she needed to be taught a lesson for her behavior. A reader even gave a solution to having Superman doused with red kryptonite, which turns him evil, so that he wouldn't appear to not be such a gentleman. Though Schaffenberger joked that you would have to suspend the series for a few months as Lois couldn't sit down afterwards. However, by the end of the 1960s, Mort Weisinger decided it was time to update Lois Lane's look, thus he had Neil Adams, an artist Kurt Schaffenberger admired, to do the cover of Lois Lane number 76 in 1967, and was finally pulled from the book with issue number 81, with him moving on to Supergirl, which he wasn't particularly fond of, bluntly calling it an assignment. In 1970, Schaffenberger left DC for 2 years, believing it was over his attempt to unionize the artists, hoping for reprint and royalty payments, which they would later get. He blamed new publisher Carmen Infantino, though Infantino suggests a different story, stating he never directed it, but he felt that maybe some other editors did. While he was no longer at DC, Schaffenberger did freelance work for Archie Comics. However, he would soon return to DC in 1972, just in time to help revive another one of his old characters from the Golden Age. In 1972, DC acquired the license for the Marvel family characters from Fawcett, eventually buying them outright in 1980, with the intention of launching a new Captain Marvel series. There was one hiccup, as Marvel had acquired the trademark to the Captain Marvel name in 1969, when they created their own character by the same name just to do so. Thus, the character was now called Shazam in DC from now on. With that, DC moved forward with a new series. In 1973, Kurt Schaffenberger joined the comic. C.C. Beck, his co-creator, had quit after 10 issues. It would last until 1978 for 35 issues, finally being canceled due to the infamous comic book implosion at DC, in which half their lineup was canceled. Though Shazam and the Marvel family has since been fully integrated into DC, as the 2019 movie shows. Schaffenberger had also worked on World's Finest, Super Friends, based on the cartoon show, where his humorous style worked quite well, and the Superman Family. Outside of DC, Schaffenberger contributed with a Joel Harris for a heavy metal story called June 2050. In 1980, Schaffenberger did the New Adventures of Superboy, which lasted until 1984 with 54 issues, which he penciled for nearly all of them. Throughout all this, Schaffenberger was known for